Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today is day 4 of spoiler season for the Scourge League, and today there's one big piece of news and one small piece of news. The big piece of news is the balance manifesto you see here. We'll come back to this in a short time. I just want to quickly get the other item out of the way so that it doesn't get missed. This is a Blight Ravaged map. This is a new mechanic that's being added as basically an uber form of blighted maps. And this map here is essentially tier 18. You'll see it's got monster level 85. And this inherently gives the monsters 37% more health and 9.2% more damage over a monster level 83 zone. So we then have this modifier 200% more monster life. This means that because these multiply together, essentially you're going to have 411% of the base hit points of a tier 83 monster, of a tier 16 map monster level 83 monster. So that's a lot of monster life. Then there's the option to have up to 9 map anointments on it, which is kind of a bit crazy and is going to result in some, absolutely bizarre combinations of mods. One thing I do want to point out is that some of these mods stack in interesting ways. We really need to see what tier loyals do when you can stack 9 of them. Additionally, there's the potential to stack 5 of the tower cost reducing mod, which could, unless there's a change to it, that would allow you to create towers for free. Maybe that's fine. Maybe the ability to create towers for free is something that's perfectly, ends up being perfectly reasonable. We shall have to see how that plays out. So this is an interesting one, but let's go back to the main thing because we're here to talk core character defenses and recovery. So let's start with a high-level overview of the whole manifesto, then we'll come back to all of the details. What they're doing fundamentally here is they are increasing player damage mitigation and decreasing player damage avoidance. That's the high-level overview. So basically, instead of a situation where what a death looks like is you take, say, 4 hits for 1800 damage within a tenth of a second because your dodge roll's unlucky on all of them. I think what you'll see, a death will be much more being chipped away by a bunch of smaller hits. So it might be like you're getting hit for 800, for 600, for 1200, for 400. And into this new system, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can protect yourself that don't necessarily exist at the moment. So for instance, you'll be able to scale armour, which will be more meaningful in the new system. You'll be able to scale a new stat called Suppression, which will give you considerable 50% avoidance instead of 100% avoidance like spell dodge. And there's also ways to scale maximum resist that are outlined in this as well. So yeah, player avoidance is nerfed, player mitigation for non-energy shield builds is buffed, player hit points on energy shield builds has been buffed, and player mitigation is now more tied to armor, evasion, and energy shield, which should make it easier to see how defensive your character is. So one question that you often see is people ask if you go to the beginning questions threads on Path of Exile subreddit, is someone saying, hey, I'm level 72 and I have 8,000 armor, is this good? Or should I have more? And in 3.15, the answer is, don't care about armor, get life instead. Whereas now I think you might actually want to have both. So there are considerable nerfs in this manifesto to Gladiator block and to Fortify with small hits. And there are significant buffs to pretty much everything else about mitigating damage. Block, however, quite surprisingly, otherwise seems untouched. And there's no announcements about the life gain on block mods on shields, which really surprised me because I thought if you're going to talk about recovery, I was really expecting to see a mention of that. But it seems like that has possibly survived. We'll have to see when we get the full patch notes, but it looks like that shield mod may well still be around in its full power form. There are much better options for mitigating spells and damage over time, especially on the right-hand side of the passive tree. And I think, at least just by reading this, it's hard to say for certain, but I think we're going to see a situation where the 3.16 Juggernaut will be genuinely a Juggernaut again. The builds like Raider and Gladiator that are the extreme outliers in powerful defense in 3.15, they're likely to get nerfed to about the level, defensively, to the level of the 3.15 Juggernaut. The 3.16 Juggernaut will be better than the 3.15 Juggernaut, and other builds will be sort of all over the place in terms of their overall defenses. But they do seem like they're broadly getting stronger. So let's go through the specifics here. Nerfs come first in the manifesto. And the first one is the response to this overarching problem. Dodge and blind provide more mitigation for fewer passive points and item slots than any other defensive type. Attack dodge does this in a form that is almost identical to evasion, but is far more efficient. Overarching goal: remove dodge entirely and review certain powerful mechanics like blind and fortify for non-melee characters. Improve almost every other scalable defense type significantly to make them more powerful. This includes armor, evasion, energy shield recovery, and spell block. So that is the high level overview. Let's dive into the details now. Armour as a core stat doesn't provide a sufficient defense with low to medium investment. This I definitely agree with. Armour characters instead rely on a number of other mechanics to provide them with the defense against physical damage that armour should in theory provide. Solution: improve the armour formula so that armour is more powerful, granting more mitigation across the board, and increase the strength of modifiers on items that add base local armour. So there's a bunch of specifics that get dived into here. And if you want to have a look at these, I suggest just clicking the link down in the video description, which will take you to the GGG official manifesto. But broadly speaking, it feels like armour values are being roughly doubled. And that is actually a lot more meaningful than people tend to think, because armour is always just a little bit short of being good. A lot on builds that just sort of grab all of the sources of, the non-outlier sources of armour. So you will find here that there's also a significant buff to determination, which needs to be mentioned. Both determination and grace are being reworked, and the rework is making both of them better than either of them are in 3.15. In fact, having both grace and determination together will feel like, having one of them now will feel sort of in a way like having both of them. So determination is going to provide both its existing base armor, it's going to provide base armor as well as its existing more multiplier to armor. Grace will keep its existing base evasion, but will also provide a more multiplier to evasion. So this is going to be pretty significant and is going to make those auras a bit better. I think a lot of what they're doing there with determination and grace is things that they can't do while aurabots and aura stackers exist. So if they are nerfing the aura stacker and aura stacker type builds, then they can come back and they can actually buff the effects of these auras for everyone else. Determination and grace have been held down for a long time by the fact that they can be scaled so high and they have to be balanced around their best use case. So with that best use case presumably getting nerfed in tomorrow's manifesto, that means that determination and grace can shine again. At least I think they'll shine. We're going to have to find out, we'll have to play around with determination to find out. But it's my gut feeling that determination and molten shell together, the new determination and the molten shell, which doesn't seem to be being changed, will be a tremendously strong defensive setup. Now, new suffix modifiers are being added to all armor-based body armor and shields that provide up to 8% additional physical damage reduction on each slot. This is huge. 8% is a lot. That's the physical damage reduction of 2 endurance charges. So this is something that players are definitely going to want to get their hands on. Even if it turns out that 7 and 8% are sort of top-end mods that most players won't have access to on otherwise good items, presumably there's lower tiers like 5 and 6%, and that's still pretty impactful. So there's also a number of changes to life recovery that come up here. New suffix modifiers have been added to all armor-based gloves, helmets, and boots that provide increased life regeneration rate. This works as a multiplier to your life regen value. So my gut tells me, and it could be wrong here, but my gut tells me that this is just going to be wasted stats. One of the reasons for this is that currently there's a few mechanics for recovering life that are just so much better than life regeneration. And I don't see the numbers on these being so high that they fix that problem. So if you are intending to play a build that is going to be getting armor and life as much as you can and using molten shell and stuff and good stuff like that, I think you are going to want to not have this. You're instead going to want to use Pack Leech, or you're going to want to use life recovery on block, or you're going to want to use life recovery on kill. I don't think you are going to want to have this mod. It could prove me wrong, but it's been a long time since slow recovery of life from regeneration has been particularly meaningful in Path of Exile, and I don't think this entire package of changes fixes that. Now, there's also some talk they're going to review monster base armor as a result of changes to the armor formula, because it seems like they're roughly doubling the effect of armor. That's going to double how much armor monsters have in effect. But they're saying here that there may be no changes if there's no significant impact on character damage. So they're not going to keep it exactly the same as it is now, but they're going to have a look and see if anything becomes ridiculous. And if it does, then they will review those things. Problem, evasion doesn't provide sufficient defense. I actually dispute that. Evasion's really powerful when you get a lot of it, but evasive characters rely on acrobatics and phase acrobatics keystone to provide attack and spell mitigation. So the way that I see it at the moment is that evasion is actually very good at protecting you from hits. The thing is that it does get used in conjunction with dodge, because dodge is so powerful, why wouldn't you use both? Anyway, the solution they're going for: remove attack dodge entirely, substantially buff evasion so that it is a good option, and make it sure it is easily available on items. Now, we do not have the new evasion formula here, so they give a couple of examples here. To have 75% to evade against a tier 16 map monster, in the current game you need 49,000 evasion. You will now need 24,200. In the current game, to get the same level of evasion against a tier 1 map monster, currently you need 23,800. You're going to need 12,700. You get 50% evasion against a tier 16. You currently need 13,750. You will now only require 8,150. And to get 25%, all you're going to need against a tier 16 map monster is 3,300 evasion rating. So this assumes that the monster that in question does not have the accurate map mod, not map mod, the monster modifier accurate, but that is pretty rare. So there's going to be an increase to modifiers on gears that add base local evasion rating and a smoothing of the progression of tiers. So this is something that we're seeing a lot, that there's, if you think of the corresponding mods on energy shield equipment, you'll think that like you have your sort of resplendent, I think it's called resplendent, the top tier, and then you have your second tier below it, your third tier below it, and they're all sort of pretty close to each other, whereas with armor and evasion, they're not close to each other at all. So this is going to be a big buff to the amount of armor and evasion that you will roll on lower tier equipment. I think that's a really good setup. However, we are missing some really important information here, and this is just how high you can push chance to evade here. We don't know whether it is going to be easier or harder or still impossible to push it to the absolute limit. So we'll have to see that information when that comes out. Here's the advice of what's happening with Grace. So Grace is going to have you and nearby allies gain 20% more evasion rating, as well as its existing bonus to flat evasion rating. And so that caps out at 29%. So Grace is going to be very strong. I think what we might see as a result is that players that want to, like, there'll be a much more of a decision to be made. Do I run Hatred and kill monsters quicker, or do I run Grace and have the monsters miss me a lot more? I think this will be a decision that players will want to make, until eventually, much later in the game, you might be able to run both. Problem, evasion provides no defense against spells, and so people use spell dodge. Solution, I really like this one. Introduce spell suppression on evasion-based items as well as the dexterity section of the passive tree. This grants a chance to halve spell damage taken. This chance can be stacked fully to 100% and convert existing sources of dodge and spell dodge to spell suppression or replace them with other bonuses. So this is a really, really good setup here. I really like this one. It is going to provide a way to deal with the hits to deal with any hit that would one-shot you. Spell suppression is going to be really good against that, unless it's one of the, massive boss slams. You're still going to die in one shot to something like the Elder's Expanding Annulus spell or something along those lines. Shape a Triple Ball or Atsuri Empowered Flame Blast, but you have a much better chance of surviving against the stuff that's not the big telegraphed mega slams. and spell suppression will fix a lot of those problems. Also, it will just smooth out the damage you're taking so that when you do die, it's not going to be as quickly as it is currently. So this is just generally a system I think I'm really happy with in theory. We'll have to find out exactly how it works, but it looks like a good setup. Additionally, Vile Grace is being reworked considerably. Chance to evade attack hits and suppress spell damage dealt to you is unlucky. So it keeps its current theme, but it's although it's not going to provide any benefit unless you've got some spell suppression on your character, but it's going to be very, very solid when it's used, and it'll still be weaker than it is in 3.15. So there's also a number of other changes there. Additional chance to evade modifiers were discontinued from all rare modifiers, passives, and Pantheon powers, as their values felt out of place, and they wanted to give that mod to Vile Grace instead. Acrobatics has been redesigned, and it no longer has any of its old properties, but instead changes modifiers to spell suppression into spell dodge at 50% of their value. The intention here is that Acrobatics is now the only source in the game for spell dodge for players that want to benefit from that playstyle. Still, spell dodge is still capped at 75%, and the Keystone will mention this. Additionally, they have changed Wind Dancer, which will be significant because Wind Dancer is one of the best passives on the entire tree, to further improve high evasion builds rather than reducing evade chance, but making it riskier if you're not evading attacks a lot. It now gives a less attack damage taken if you haven't been hit by an attack recently, and more evasion rating and attack damage taken if you have been hit. So it's better for evasion characters that have a high evasion rating, and bad for characters that are being hit a lot. It has no interaction with spells now to focus on its interaction with evasion. So broadly speaking, Wind Dancer is being nerfed there, but I do think that the overall package is going to make characters on the right-hand side of the tree that haven't been stacking dodge to the moon considerably stronger, whilst nerfing those that have been stacking dodge to the moon. Net effect will be raider tankiness brought down to 3.15 Juggernaut level, I think, and other characters, and then other characters will be buffed. So there's a little bit of discussion here about outliers. So one of the things that's happened is that they have, that because armor and evasion have been so underpowered, well, not so much evasion, but armor has been underpowered for a long time. They've provided a few sources of tremendously large amounts of it. So in 3.15, a lot of players see armor as stack 50,000 plus or don't bother. And as a result, GGG have buffed some sources of armor to the point that you can get 100,000 plus on a character. These outlier sources are getting nerfs. Vile Molten Shell, Brass Dome, Memory Vault, Formless Inverno, Cracian's Carapace, and Perfect Form are getting nerfed. Additionally, Transcendence will be nerfed because of the new increases that are coming up to maximum resistances that will be in the same areas of the tree as the armor nodes are. So next up is this section problem. Characters who solely rely on armor are not protected against elemental damage, and the solution here, add more maximum elemental resistances to areas of the passive tree that have armor in them. So that's interesting. We'll have to see the hard numbers on this, but I think it could be really strong. Maximum resistances are just inherently a very, very powerful stat. And so that could be really, really powerful if that's, well, depending on the numbers that are used. Next, we have a bit of discussion here about energy shield stacking methods. So firstly, the veiled modifier that increases quality on equipment. So this is hybrid 1 stat and evasion. Hybrid 1 stat and quality was essential to maximize energy shield on items. Additionally, there's a few other mods that are essential for energy shield builds, energy from Naught clusters and things like this. Essentially, energy from Naught clusters are being nerfed. The veiled modifier is being reworked to the point that it no longer serves its current purpose, but there'll be considerable buffs to other sources of energy shield. We're going to have to come to the variable base type section soon, and we'll do that, but that's they're mentioning here that you can get up to 20% increased base energy shield on items as part of the variable base system. So we'll get to that in a sec. In fact, that's right up here. So, problem, with the desire to increase armor, evasion, and energy shield power across the board, we now felt the base values on items were too low. In addition, we felt our item system needs more base type heterogeneity. So what they're saying here is that they want more variance from one Val Regalia to the next. At the moment, any Val Regalia item of 86 is the same as any other one, unless you count things like influence and link status and things like that. What they wanted to do was create a situation where some of them would just be better than others. And now their solution. I don't like this system, but we'll talk on it in a sec. Base types are now generated with a random 0 to 10% higher base defense as an inbuilt, currently non-modifiable property. This means that all base types can be better than they currently are, and armor base types are not homogeneous anymore. Energy shield values on base types instead vary from 0 to 20%. So this is essentially a less multiplier to the amount of relevant items that drop on the ground, although that's already very, very low. It means that you can no longer treat all crafting bases the same. It's going to create a situation where if you want to craft armor pieces, and when I use armor, I'm not talking about armor as in the in-game stat. I'm talking about anything that could benefit from an armor as scrap. If you're wanting to craft armor, your workflow is going to change in a way that I don't really think I like. So let's talk about how the best items in the game tend to get crafted for armor pieces. Again, using armor as a catch-all term for anything that can benefit from an armor as scrap. At the moment, you start it by sourcing a 6-link from a divination card, influencing that 6-link via a Conqueror's Orb if it's not already appropriately influenced by the div card you used, and then you apply various crafting orbs to it. Now, what you're going to need to do is source a 20% better item drop by trading from another player for it. Then you're going to need to 6-link that manually, or, well, yeah, if you're a high-end crafter, you never use the crafting bench recipe. It's a rip-off. If you are someone that's just crafting something for yourself, you might. Then you need to beast split it. Then you need to influence it with a Conqueror's Exalt. Then you need to roll it. You're definitely going to be beast splitting anything you 6-link manually. And I think that this is just creating quite a bit of extra work, quite a bit of extra trading. I don't think it's going to play well. I think the core idea of having some sort of difference in item drops, like, maybe can be okay. And the other thing that's got to be said is that every player is just going to filter out things that aren't whatever ends up being the highest they can realistically get. So if it turns out that it's equal chances to get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 20%. So it's 1 in 21 Val Regalias have 20%. Every loot filter is just going to obliterate all of the 0 to 19s. And unless they're influenced or something like that. And then you might use one that drops influenced or drops with special links as a starting point for a character. Then you've got this base types with the other defenses. It's still going to be the same. People are just going to block out everything that's not the best. And I don't know, I think that there needs to be decreases in the amount of loot that drops from monsters, but this way of doing it, I don't think is the way to go about it. Anyways, opinions out of the way, let's go back to the facts of what's planned at the moment. And they're going to say here that Energy Shield is most often used with a leech and regen like life rather than embracing its unique recharge mechanic. The Energy Shield recharge is getting buffed hard because it's not good enough at the moment. And despite the buffs, I still don't think it will be. They're making a number of changes. They're removing Wicked Ward's drawback. They're doing a whole bunch of things, but I still don't think it's going to matter. I think you're still going to use the top-end recovery methods for Energy Shield recharge, just like you are not going to care about those new glove mods for armor gloves, because what you really want is the best sources of life recovery, not something new. I don't think that Energy Shield recharge is going to be the best source of ES recovery for builds, and therefore you're not going to invest in it. Could be wrong on that front. Next, there's a little discussion of Evasion and Energy Shield hybrid builds, and this is an interesting one. So builds wanting to invest in both Evasion and Energy Shield simultaneously rely heavily on Ghost Dance, requiring them to be a Trickster. Solution: Ghost Dance being removed from the Trickster tree and added to the Classic tree. This is a big deal, and this will result in some sort of changes to the Trickster Ascendancy, but I really like this change. I think it's something where the Trickster can still excel at Evasion Energy Shield stacking if it wants to, but it's no longer mandatory to play a Trickster to have access to Ghost Stance there. So yeah, I think that's a really good setup. Additionally, there is a new mechanic that's being added, again to the Keystone tree, called Divine Shield. And this is something that is intended to incentivize stacking both armor and energy shield. Again, this is something that you wouldn't do at the moment on a random build. Basically, the only reason in 3.15 to consider stacking both armor and energy shield is the unique shield Aegis Aurora. Side note, Aegis Aurora is getting nerfed indirectly by this package of changes as a package. I think is going to reduce the power of Aegis Aurora, but that's, I think most characters will still be better off with this setup. So what they're doing here is they're adding in this new mechanic, new Keystone passive skill called Divine Shield. Percentage of total physical damage prevented from hits recently is regenerated as energy shield per second. Cannot recover your energy shield to above your armor. We are still deciding on the specific value. I really think I like this a lot. This is something that is a really unique way of rewarding investment in two different defensive mechanics at the same time. And it just looks like it's done really well. So if you've got a lot of physical damage reduction from armor, then that's going to result in you gaining a whole bunch of energy shield recovery that's only turned on when you need it, i.e. when you've just been hit by physical damage. However, it's going to be a bit tricky if you're taking purely elemental damage from some sources. This is sort of not going to work very well in that situation. I want to play around with this, but at the moment, I really like the idea of Divine Shield. I think it could be really good, and it could create a situation where you can have some quite tanky builds that spend a lot of time in the Templar area of the passive tree, rather than being forced to either go to the Raider area to pick up phase acrobatics and acrobatics, or go to be a Gladiator and pick up the insane block node there. So this is an interesting new build defense outline that's being empowered by this Divine Shield. Maybe it turns out not to be good, but I'm keen to try it out. Problem, some areas of the passive tree, especially near the shadow, have no defense against and very little life regen to offset damage over time effects. So there's a number of changes to life regen modifiers on gear that we've already mentioned that I don't think are going to get there, but who knows, maybe I'm wrong. And they're also adding a new keystone between the Witch and the Shadow area on the passive skill tree to heavily dampen the initial impact of damage over time. So this is Leith Shade, and you take 75% less damage over time if you've started taking damage over time in the last second. However, 100% more duration of ailments on you. So this is intriguing. You're going to get hit a lot harder by bleed, by poison, and by ignite, especially with this 100% more duration. But if you can solve ailments via various methods, then 75% less damage over time is really impactful. So I want to try it out. That's interesting, and I think it could be good, but we don't know the exact details. Problem, a few specific mechanics grant a lot of life regeneration, especially with endurance charge stacking, but for many other sources, life regen is not very powerful. Solution, remove various sources of life regen per endurance charge or lower their values. Review effects that grant life recovery rate and high values of life regeneration. Add new passives in the strength area of the tree that grant life regeneration and one source of increased life regeneration rate. So I'm sort of surprised that they call out life regen here. I don't think it's in a particularly great place. It doesn't help you in burst damage situations, life regeneration. Whereas on the flip side, something like Life Leech it gives you so much life recovery per second that it can help you in a burst damage situation. Life regeneration is totally different. Anyways, I've said a lot about life regeneration. Doesn't need to be said anymore. Shadow attackers don't have a form of life recovery they excel at, whilst almost every other core character has a signature special recovery method. And so here they're talking about adding new passive skill clusters to the shadow area of the passive tree, allowing investment in combination of life on hit, life on kill, and life leech. This also provides a source of maximum total life recovery per second from life leech in the shadow area of the passive tree. So that should be pretty significant as a way for shadow attack builds to recover life without having to trend too far out of the way. The main thing here is that it's got some maximum total life recovery per second from life leech, because I think that is the key thing. Witch and Shadow casters don't have accessible forms of life recovery. Now, I think witches sort of do in the form of Stone Golem, but that takes quite a bit of investment to make it good, because Stone Golems like dying. Elementalists certainly do. One of the most extreme outlier life recovery characters I've ever played actually was my 3.14 Elementalist, which had over 1,000 points of life regen per second, which is sort of getting to invested leech levels. So they're adding a new passive skill clusters to the area of the tree between the Shadow and the Witch, allowing investment in life on kill and recouping a portion of damage taken as life. More info on passive tree changes will come later. Now we get to the big thing about block. So block is a pretty fundamental form of defense available to characters, seeing as it is only available on shields, all characters can use shields. But the Gladiator Ascendancy is far more efficient for block investment compared to any other class because of Versatile Combatant. So, solution. Nerf Versatile Combatant and move it out of Gladiator and onto the passive tree. So, then there's also a number of changes to block chance and spell block chances you can get elsewhere. So this is interesting. I was not expecting to see buffs to non-Gladiator block. I thought that block was in a very powerful state in 3.15 as it was. So Versatile Combatant is now a keystone passive on the passive tree. This grants 2% chance to block spell damage per 1% overcapped chance to block attack damage. And it also grants minus 25% to maximum chance to block attack damage and block spell damage. So this means that you're going from, instead of being 75% attack damage capped and also 75-75, but with no realistic way to hit 75% spell block, you can now go to 50 and 50, and to get to 50-50 is going to take the same level of investment that getting to 75% attack block will. So that's the first thing, and I think that you'll find a situation where Versatile Combatant seems reasonable without being great. More access to spell block has been added between the Templar and Witch sections of the passive tree. Suffix modifiers that grant attack block and spell block on shields have been improved, and new tiers have been added. These now grant up to 16% attack and 15% spell block respectively at the highest tier. That is a lot. Gladiator's block ascendancy passives will be reworked, and they're doing, that's sort of still a work in progress. And we're making further changes to passive skills and the life granted by bone offering. The main thing that we're mentioning that is worth mentioning here is that there is absolutely no mention of reiterating that there is no mention of life recovery on block, which is one of the most powerful mods on the entire influence pool in the entire game. And it was not something I expected to survive this patch, but it looks like it does. There's a number of changes to shield mods here that, broadly speaking, will make shields better than they are. Although it's hard to say exactly. Like, there'll be the odd person who loses out because the mod that they wanted for a corner case situation is going away. But broadly speaking, shields should be in a better place than they are in 3.15 as a result of this overall sweeping set of changes. They'll be much easier to roll, but you'll lose a little bit of flexibility in some of the niche things that could conceivably happen on a shield. Problem: as a defense, blind was equivalent to an extremely high level of evasion with minimal character investment. It felt mandatory for all characters. Solution: make blind synergize with evasion so that it is powerful only if you have a very evasive character. The power level of the new blind is significantly lower than before, but has some options for further investment. So, blinded targets now have 20% less accuracy and evasion rating. This change makes it so that blind is of no defensive help to characters that have no evasion. Now, granted, you're going to have some evasion on every character because you get 3 points per level, unless you have sacrificed that evasion by speccing into either Iron Reflexes on the passive tree, or into, there's something else that does it. I think it's Unwavering Stance that prevents you from evading attacks as well. So blind is no longer blind will no longer have a strong effect for low evasion characters. It will do a tiny bit, but it's something that really starts coming into its own when you are at the point where the monster's reduced accuracy rating is the difference between it hitting you and missing you. And actually 20% less accuracy rating is a lot more impactful than it sounds. So this is still going to be good. I think that every evasive character is going to at least want to consider blinding nearby enemies if they can, but it's no longer going to be a must-have. Also, it will lower the evasion rating of monsters when you hit them as well. So like once you blind an enemy, that lowers its evasion rating, which is also an offensive bonus. So ultimately, I think that this is going to be a significant nerf to blind in general, but I think that as an overall package, characters should still be stronger. There's a couple of changes to reservation skills, and interestingly, there's some information on the new rework of Tempest Shield. So Tempest Shield is being reworked to be a 25% reservation effect that now provides a large amount of spell block, as well as an immunity to shock. It has the property still of shooting out lightning on block, and the damage has been significantly buffed. I'm interested to see how this works. This is something that I can't do anything beyond just say, this looks cool, but we have to see it in practice. It may be that the tankiest characters in the game are ones that stack 75% attack block, then use Tempest Shield and scale as much spell block on items as they can, alongside having a moderate chunk of, say, armour. And then there's a reference that they've already buffed Arctic Armour to give immunity to freeze. There's a little bit of discussion here about Fortify. There's no new information on Fortify. So Fortify is still being reworked so that it's about melee, and something that melee characters can have 100% uptime on. Non-melee characters can't get 100% uptime unless they choose to be a champion. So that's the goal that they're going for, and they're currently considering a situation where Fortify, the intensity of Fortify is dependent upon the amount of damage that you do, and that a little hit that, like a shield charge from a caster, something that's got no investment in attack, that will only provide a partial Fortify buff. But that's still a work in progress, and details should be announced later. Anyways, this has been a bit of a marathon, but that sort of goes through all of the changes today. Once more, the high-level overview, I think, of this is that it should be easier to understand gearing for defense. It should be more about armor evasion and energy shield, and less about sort of knowing how 6 obscure different things interact. Some of the top-end outliers are being nerfed, but broadly speaking, characters should be stronger after this, unless you had an extreme knowledge of some of the more ridiculous mechanisms of scaling defenses in the game. And I think that when character deaths happen, because there's a lot of ways to mitigate damage and less ways to avoid it, when deaths happen, they will be spread out over a longer period of time than they currently are. So I'm pretty happy with this manifesto, but if you've got comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, may your Varlobs have interesting results, and it's back again tomorrow because it looks like the auras and elemental damage over time manifesto is coming tomorrow. That's going to have a lot of information about elemental overload. It's going to have info about elemental equilibrium, and it's going to have info about what else is happening with auras.